The human story is the search for belonging. From childhood to adulthood, in joy and in struggle, we all sit in questions of how to make sense of it all. What is our place? Why are we here? What is our story of searching? Join us in conversation with community members, each sharing some of their own story. I am Ben Spratt, and this is Belonging. I am so excited and feel really honored to get to be in conversation with the amazing Lisa Timmel. There's a lot that I'll say about Lisa. I will say that over my years here at Rhoda Shalom, she is one of the wittiest, wisest, and most wonderful people to be learning with and be journeying with. And just a few words on Lisa here. So Lisa and her husband, David, have been members here for 25 years, and their children, Nick and Nora, grew up here at Rhoda Shalom and are alumni of our Rhoda Shalom school. Now are off in the world frolicking and making mischief wherever they go. It's important for me to note that Lisa is a renowned dramaturg who spent the first part of her career with a whole lot of different accolades. Dramaturg, creative producer, professor, so many new plays and musicals for Broadway and off-Broadway and experimental theater and myriad other spaces. And she has really been involved in her career in producing new American plays, and then she made what is now being phrased as an iconic pivot and has become a native plant and restoration gardener in Central Park's North Woods, where she is responsible for 9.5 acres of meadow, grassland, and woodland environments, and just recently received her gardening certificate. It is such a gift to be with you, Lisa.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Ben.
So this podcast is all around this same prompt. Would love to hear about your search for belonging.
Well, it's funny because at certain times in my life, when I was much younger, I'm sure I might have prided myself on saying, I don't need to belong anywhere. It wasn't until I was much older that I really started thinking about notions of belonging. My life here at Congregation Rhoda Shalom was pivotal in that, I married my husband, and I had grown up Catholic, and he had grown up Jewish, and I did not want to raise my children Catholic, but I didn't want to raise them without a religion. And David wanted Jewish children, and I said, that's fine, but I'm not going to do this for you. You have to do it. It's very easy and traditional for, the woman takes care of the religious education of the children. And I'd seen a lot of that, and I didn't want anything to do with it. It wasn't my religion, and it wasn't my tradition. But of course, I did spend a lot of my time here at the school and at the synagogue, and I was very involved. I took Hebrew lessons, mostly because I wanted to be able to have conversation with them about what they were going through. And we chose this place. And one of the components, the key moments of what led our decision was when he called and he said, hi, I'm David Marcus. I'm interested in joining a synagogue. I'm part of an interfaith couple. And the woman on the other end of the phone said, that's awesome. And so he felt really, really good about that. I think that was just huge for him to feel like that we were going to come and I was going to belong to this place as much as he did. We started and things were great. And around the time of our son's bar mitzvah, by this point, I started feeling just a little weird about where I was vis-a-vis my relationship to the congregation, my relationship to Judaism in general and Jewishness. So that did end up in a conversion process, but that's not really where we started. So that's sort of the first half of it in terms of belonging and journeys of belonging. But belonging is a funny word because it's both, you can be the subject of belonging and the object of belonging, and being the object of belonging is not great. And also there's the word longing is in there, and it's like, what do you have a desire for? And obviously, for obvious reasons, because I'm now a gardener, I think a lot about environments in a way that I didn't think about them before. That dogwood you planted that's not doing well and the magnolia you planted that's doing well, and they're kind of in, adjacent environments, and you're trying to think about what's happening around them. And then you get deeper into it. So, what's happening in the soil and what do they need? And it turns out, of course, that everything in a garden, everything that's growing in the earth is part of this network, right? From microscopic organisms all the way up to, giant redwoods. And whether they thrive or don't thrive is really not a matter of what's inside them. It's a right plant, right place. So it's a matter also, I'd say at least 50% of what's around them. It's not enough to be a healthy plant. You got to have everything else. And when I was going through the conversion process with you, I remember at some point, and also just trying to explain it to people who just thought, well, that's weird. Like who decides to believe in God at the age of, 35, 40? At a certain point, I wanted my inner life to match my outer life. Who you are and where you belong is almost as much about who is around you, how they affect your outlook on life, how they affect just the health of your environment.
And I think that desire to have the inner life and the outer life be in conversation with each other, to feel like they are, using your analogy here, part of this larger ecosystem, it requires a person to be willing to plumb the depths a little bit. It requires a person to not just look at the overall surroundings and say, hey, is this the right place for me? But ultimately, what am I bringing forward? What am I adding into that ecosystem? And also, what are my needs?
And I work in a very special part of the park. It's called the natural areas. These are specific areas of the park that we're attempting to do a kind of maintenance and a kind of encouragement of native plant life that is as close as we could get to the oak hickory forest that Manhattan was at the time in the 17th century. And what the purpose of this park, though, is actually to, yes, it was designed as a respite from the grid and a place where you go in nature, and the north end is designed to look like the Adirondacks. Fair enough. But I wish that more people had that sense of, I belong in this environment as an organism, that it is good for me to be next to a tree, that it is good for me to be in the shade. The bird watchers are wonderful. Because they're so respectful of the space and they're so invested in the health of the space because it brings the birds. I think about that too, because it's just like, it's not yours. Or I'll get into a habit of saying my meadow. Someone was in my meadow. It's not my meadow, right? And I think that in some ways, also what I was doing in that process with you over 3.5 years of conversation was figuring out, how to belong without possessing. I'm not just taking from this place for an education for my children or for an ethnic religious identity because I had feelings and opinions at the age of 24. And, that kind of mutual responsibility so that it becomes a feedback loop, like any good symbiotic system.
So to go in, weave those worlds together for a second. So the world of theater, the world of, we'll call it nature, even if we'll call it nature, and then let's call it religion. Mm-hmm. We could add some other worlds, but let's take those three worlds for a moment. And, in thinking about these aspects of yourself and this desire of how do we help elevate in ourselves and in the people around us an awareness that we are, whether we like it or not, a part of an ecosystem. What is the human experience or the human mental move that you think bars us from seeing what already is? In the work you're doing right now, I can only imagine how readily evident it is that no matter what mental moves we make, we are ultimately organisms in this larger environment. So what do you see happening in the human psyche that blocks that for many of us?
I think we want certainty, and in our search for certainty, we lock down certain definitions. I'm at the theater because, I want to be entertained, and we maybe don't think about that we're at the theater because we want to be with other people. We're at the theater because there's some part of us that maybe still believes a little bit in magic, and it can become very hard to see below the surface, especially because in theater, for example, we do a lot of work to hide what is underneath. And I do believe that good art grabs us on the surface, and is doing its magic underneath, whether we know that it is or not. We go to these places for certainty, and if they're doing their job right, you're going to come out asking why and not knowing why, and then understanding that your job is to figure out what your why is.
So if we can, I'd love to hear what your why is.
My why? Oh no. I want to be of use, and I am skeptical of the efficacy of human effort. You know, being a dramaturg, you're someone who is a little behind the scenes. You're a lot behind the scenes, and you're even sometimes you're the person who reads 10 pages from a young playwright, and you think, wow, this person's got something. I don't know what that is. And then, 10 years later, you're finally producing a show of theirs. And I was always very skeptical of my own usefulness in that process, but I trusted the people that were telling me that it was useful. I always did have this feeling of like, well, I'm just talking to you about your play, and I guess that has a kind of use, but I don't have any answers for you, and you have to go out and find the answers. And when my time in theater was up, and I knew it was up one day, I was talking to a writer, and I thought to myself, I just don't care if you fix this play. And so, when I finally got I started by volunteering in Central Park before I got this job. And I came home from my first day of volunteering, and David said to me, I haven't seen you smile like that in a really long time. And I don't think he even realized how much losing, I guess in a sense, losing my religion in terms of theater, was so painful. But I had to face up to, it would have been very easy to keep doing what I was doing, even though I had stopped caring. And I just wasn't prepared to do that. So I think in a very roundabout way, my why really was about living with authenticity and in a kind of truth. When it came to being in the garden, it was, again, I call it the photo negative of my theater life, because my theater life was indoors, windowless rooms. In gardening and being in the park, I am outdoors all the time. I think that's one of the things people get very surprised about. And there are no windows, there are no doors, and everything is dirty. My fingernails are always dirty now. It's a sad situation. But I care. I care deeply about what happens to, preserving what little we have left ourselves of this Eden that was here in the 17th century that we paved over. And every day someone walks past us and says, thank you for what you do for this park. Thank you for what you do for the birds. We don't plant jewelweed. It's a weed. It's a native plant. And the birders every fall are like, I love how much jewelweed you're planting. And you're like, yes, you're welcome. We love the jewelweed too. So, and I do, I just feel like actually in both endeavors, in theater and in participating in the religious life and in gardening, you're making your corner of the world just a little better. You should be, if you're doing it right? You should be making it a more pleasant place to be.
And, I'm wondering, for the one who made this iconic pivot, and, you mentioned to me before how now you wear a uniform where you kind of just blend in, and, people don't necessarily notice you because you're just a part of the backdrop of the park. And I'm wondering if you can unpack some of the countercultural moves, not because you're trying to be countercultural as much as I feel like you're pointing towards something that most of us are searching for. Most of us feel in some layer of our life like there's something not right. And sometimes our response is either to withdraw, run away, or try to just, become the despot, the puppet master of some little fiefdom. And you did something countercultural as you decided to spin in a slightly different direction. And I'm just wondering if you can unpack a little bit of that for those of us who are stumbling and struggling and trying to imagine, okay, I've been doing the same thing on repeat over and over. Haven't quite gotten there. What might be the move we can consider?
I mean, first of all, who am I if I'm not myself, right? It's the first thing that has to happen is that, the first thing, the first person, the first community that you have to belong to is yourself, right? And that's a lot of what your early 20s, I'm watching my kids go through their early 20s and figuring out who they want to be and, what kind of people they want to be around and how they want to move through the world, and then you have your search for partnership, right? And then it's like, what other person, can I belong to? And do I deserve love? Can I give love? And then that sort of grows exponentially. And then, yes, you get into the pattern, right? You asked me earlier about weeding. And it's the one thing that drives a lot of people out of this kind of job is because, you weed the Japanese knotweed and 6 weeks later, it's right back where it was when you weeded it. And then you weed it again. And you can't kill this plant. So you just have to acknowledge all you're doing is making room for the plants that you do want to be there to get some sunlight. If you are only focused on, I have to get the task done and not on why am I doing the task? This task is useless. I've done it. We have this with our volunteers a lot. Do you think it does any good to keep pulling the mugwort? Yes, we do. You can't see it because we've been doing this for 15 years and you came in 2 years ago, but we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot of progress to go. So I think that, again, it's purpose and understanding why you are, on this hammer trail. And then when you come up against that moment where you realize you don't have purpose in this anymore, that it has no meaning for you, or, even in my career transition and, the pivot didn't become iconic until I said, I'm absolutely looking in the wrong direction. I kept looking to things that were adjacent to what I already knew. And I just wanted to do something different, and I was just volunteering. And if I hadn't been set to volunteer in a native plant meadow, would I have gotten bitten this hard? I don't know. When, that original gardener I worked with, she took a job, West Virginia, and she left. And on her last day, I hugged her and I said, you changed my life. And she's like, you have to leave before I start crying. And she was very sweet. And it's interesting because I've had a lot of people tell me that I changed their life. You called me and invited me into this writing group. You changed my life. And of course, I wasn't setting out to change anybody's life. I was just, doing my job the best way that I knew how. And so I guess, it's, and, I'm a hypocrite because I had no patience with myself during this whole process. But it's to have patience with yourself and to understand that you might not know. You don't know. You're going to plant those ferns, but you don't know, are the squirrels going to dig them up? Maybe. You're going to, feel useless pulling this plant, but, are the things that you planted to replace them going to take root? Sometimes they really do, and they do it beautifully. Sometimes they do it too well, and you're like, uh-oh, even though this plant is technically a native, we got to get rid of it. So when you see that ironweed growing out of a crack in the cement, you should just leave it. Just leave it. Let it grow. Let some insect, some beetle come along and feed on it or pollinate on it and see what grows again next year. That plant doesn't, it's growing in a crack in the sidewalk and it's doing great. Like, leave it alone. Let it grow.
It's interesting to then kind of play that out into the human experience. And you think about, I think in my life of all of the people who probably rightly were trying to prune me or pluck me or move me or tell me the way I'm supposed to be. And ultimately, at some point it comes to the place of some of the most powerful people in my life, the most impactful and, people in my life were some of the people who simply invited me to imagine maybe you're right in the right place where you need to be. And now you need to figure out what you're going to do with the growth opportunity that's in front of you. And I think there is something wise. And as parents, I think we sit in this all the time, and, but, I was thinking as we were talking, Lisa, about the Joseph Campbell notion that, The treasure we seek is always in the cave we're too afraid to enter. And sometimes along our lives, we get people who are willing to invite us into the caves. This idea that Torah is always given in the wilderness. The thing that we want in life for fulfillment is usually not in continuing to rinse and repeat what we did before, because the road's always moving itself and the world is always changing, and we can do our best to cement over it, but nature will always find a way through the cracks. And I think there's something interesting, because in your story is the embrace of the lack of control, but almost the magical quality that comes with that is the universe can be seen as overwhelming and scary, but there's something majestic in that. It's like, how does an ironweed grow in the midst of a, Manhattan sidewalk? I mean, it really is wonderful when you pause for a moment. And I feel like kids are wired to feel that awe and wonder. And for us, we just walk off until we find the curated experience that we think is real nature. And I'm wondering, as you have journeyed into the wilderness of Central Park, what have you discovered about yourself?
So I think what I have learned about myself is a little bit that I was right about myself, that I was right about what I needed, that there was life after theater. I suspected it all along. But I learned that, when you make a change like that, there are many people who fall by the wayside. And I thought I would be okay with it. And I was okay with it. Not that I don't miss some of the people that have fallen by the wayside, but I understand how hard it is to step out of your environment. You get rooted where you are, not to really belabor these gardening metaphors. But, I kind of always thought that I was a little bit courageous. My mother would have said, yeah, you always did think things would work out. And she didn't mean it as a compliment. I think she just thought it was blind optimism. I would say it might be the most joyful experience, wandering in the woods of Central Park, even in the ways that it is very difficult. I have to confront a lot of things up there that are ugly about the way city life affects people, and the way that the Northwood becomes a refuge for people who have nowhere else to go. It's one of the ways in which this park, weirdly enough, supports the people of New York, that there is a place for some people who need it to hide. And I think I'm surprised a little bit about my ability to have the amount of empathy and sorrow that I have for some of the people that are living up there. And the reality is we can't let them stay. I am luckily not the person who has to tell them to go. And I always make sure to say good morning so they know that I'm there. I'm there doing my job. I'm not going to bother them.
I love looking at the step into Central Park as a way of seeing not only ourselves, but also, again, the larger breadth of humanity, and maybe even layers of this city and the ecosystem of the city that we don't always want to acknowledge. I was thinking about Robin Hall Timmer's Braiding Sweetgrass. Some of what came out of the book, and I feel like that has been for me also a little bit of the story in my own life, from being a science geek and becoming a rabbi, is as we start to plumb the depths of a field, we start to realize, that once you've done enough learning and studying, you start to realize just how organic, how almost chaotic, but also how cosmically beautiful it all is. And it, in some ways, inspires this feeling of a connected understanding that, I can't look at, a mushroom as, disconnected from, an aspen tree. I can't look at, my own human being as separate from you, that ultimately these every interactions show us or point us towards something deeper that we don't always want to grasp hold of, because it's overwhelming. It's scary. It's, in some ways, it makes us feel so, as you said before, almost like insignificant in a universe where we want desperately to find our belonging by knowing that we're significant. So I want to imagine for a moment that you get to meld together all the chapters of Lisa Timmel, all the different circles in which you have places of belonging or lost places of belonging. Think about as, having David and Nick and Nora and all of your friends and all the people in your life, if we're going to collapse all of these circles together and you were going to lift up what is a bit of the spark that you believe you bring into the ecosystem, what is it?
One of the things that we did a lot pre-COVID and have done a little bit since is, we would have these spaghetti dinners on Friday nights, and we have a list that's like 175 people, and they all get the invite, and it's kind of like a mad scramble to get a seat at the table. And then we do a little, if you get a seat, then you can't come back for a little while to make room. And there are a lot of people on that list that have never come. And occasionally I'll email them and say, would you like to drop off the spaghetti list? And they say, no, I want to stay on the list. I like getting the emails. And I know they're never going to come. One of the people on the list just won a Tony. He is never going to come to spaghetti night. But here's a place where you can come and you have a meal and someone will listen to your story and then you get to go back out into the world. And I think that is something that I really learned from theater. And it was the theater training, the really listening with your whole body and being present and just noticing and then thinking about what you're going to do next. And it's really served me very well because I'll be like, I'll come in and I'll say, hey, the New Jersey tea is blooming. And, the assistant manager will fall over and be like, I can't, she's like, oh, I'm so excited that, yes, I am noticing things. That is my job, is to look and to notice and to see and then to take action.
Beautiful. Well, I think we'll let that be the last word. Thank you so much, Lisa. This is incredible. So much wisdom for us to be gleaning, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to bring a little bit of your story. For those of you who want some more witticism, for those of you who want to be more inspired by the iconic pivot, please seek out the amazing Lisa Timmel. Such a gift to be with you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for joining us and listening to this story of belonging. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram. For more information about CRS, visit us online at rodoshalom.org.